Welcome, everyone. It is now 3 o'clock, time to begin. I'm Donald Taylor, and I'm part of the team responsible for technical assistance here at the YES Center. Welcome to today's presentation, Concrete Employment Solutions, 10 Years of Experience with Tennessee's Employment Roundtable, presented by Wanda, Willis, and Lauren Pearcy. This webinar is a production of the Youth Employment Solutions Center and the Partners in Employment Project. The mission of the YES Center is to improve competitive integrated employment outcomes for transition-aged youth and young adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The YES Center is a joint endeavor of TASH and Transcend and is funded by the Administration on Community Living's Administration on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. We are scheduled for an hour and a half today. Mrs. Willis and Pearcy will speak for about an hour, and then there will be dedicated time at the end for questions and answers. If you have a burning question, you can type it in the chat box and I will attempt to get it in. Once we're at the end of the formal presentation and at the Q&A portion of this webinar, I will enable participant microphones. So if you have media on your computer, you can participate by speaking your question. But if you don't have a microphone on your computer, you can pose your question by typing it into the Q&A window. The Q&A window is available by rolling your mouse over the Zoom webinar window. A hidden menu in the lower rail will appear, and you can choose the Q&A button. You can control your individual volume for the presentation using the volume controls on your local computer. Captioning is provided for this webinar. If you roll your mouse over the Zoom window, the menu at the bottom of the window will show, and you can select the Close Captioning button to turn it on. If the captioning box appears in an inconvenient location on your screen, you can click on it with your mouse and drag it to a better location. If you're having trouble with the, Today we're excited to have Wanda Willis and Lauren Pearcy to share their 10 years of experience coordinating the Tennessee Employment Roundtable, a large interagency group to coordinate programs for young people with disabilities. Wanda Willis has been the executive director of the Tennessee Council on Developmental Disabilities since 1991. Under Ms. Willis's leadership, the council recently launched a Disability Leadership Academy for executive state employees in Tennessee who administer disability programs, led Tennessee's implementation of Supporting Families Community of Practice national grant, and graduated the 24th class of Tennessee's Partners in Policymaking Leadership Institute. Ms. Willis began her career in 1971 as a special education teacher. She held several positions in Tennessee's Developmental Disability Agency, including Director of Planning. Ms. Willis has a master's degree in special education from the University of South Carolina. Lauren Pearcy is the Director of Public Policy at the Tennessee Council on Developmental Disabilities. She has been the Tennessee Council's Director of Public Policy since 2016. She previously worked at Tennessee's Medicaid agency in the Long-Term Services and Support Division. During 6 years as a senior policy analyst for the National Governors Association, she helped produce the report, A Better Bottom Line, Employing People with Disabilities. She has a master's degree in public policy from George Washington University. Please join me in welcoming Wanda Willis and Lauren Pearcy.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Donald. It's our pleasure to spend some time with you this afternoon talking with you about one of our favorite initiatives in Tennessee, and that is our Employment Roundtable. This comes on a really perfect day for us because the Roundtable just met this morning, and as we were waiting to begin the webinar this afternoon, Lauren and I were just talking about how being with the Roundtable kind of cheers us up and pumps us up for the work we do every day. So we'll begin. You should be seeing the PowerPoint on your screen, and we'll just launch right into providing some background information on what this group of people, what this initiative is all about, and what it's meant to the state of Tennessee. The Roundtable is a Council on Developmental Disabilities led project where we simply, the Council convenes a group of state agencies on a monthly basis. And we have developed just a real camaraderie and a real place for agencies to trust each other, to facilitate communication about what we're doing across government in terms of linking people up with employment programs and ultimately helping people find employment and sustain employment. So let me just start. There may be some councils on developmental disabilities on the phone today. I hope there are, if you're there. Hello, colleagues. But the council is, in this state, we are a state agency. If you know anything about councils, often called DD councils, were established by federal law, by the Federal Developmental Disabilities Act. Also in Tennessee, were established by executive order, and we're very happy a couple of years ago when our governor made us a freestanding agency, which helped immensely with our visibility in the state. Our council members include private citizens from across Tennessee who either have a disability or are a family member of a person with a disability. And so this gives us just a wonderful connection to people in the state who have disability and what their issues are, particularly with government programs. The members are appointed by the governor, and we take great care in our state, spend a lot of time in recruitment toward making sure that the members on the council represent the diversity of the state in terms of geographical areas, but also different disabilities, sensory disabilities, intellectual disabilities occurring actually different points in life. So we want a very diverse group, and we believe we maintain that all the time. In addition to the private citizens, we have representatives on the council from state agencies that administer funding for disability-related support services. So, you know, Department of Education, Housing, Voc Rehab, the DD agency, the Medicaid agency, our DD network partners, the P&A, and our 2 university centers all sit on the council. So it gives us a really powerful base, I think, for hearing a lot of information, both from the customer side and also from the executive branch side, state agency side, and a lot of those issues that come up at the council meetings we take to the roundtable. So let me talk a little bit about the roundtable in particular. Now, you know, the roundtable, as Donald mentioned, has been going on for about 10 years, but the fact is that it started several years before that. The council began probably 15 or 20 years ago convening what I call the usual suspects when it comes to employment services for people with disabilities, and that is Voc Rehab, our DD agency that administered our Medicaid waivers, and Department of Education. Along with one of our USEDs, we met on a monthly basis with this very small group, and that really kind of set the, set the pace for us for the council to coordinate this kind of conversation. I mention it because, as you see on the screen, this group has grown rather large, and I think to look at it, you might think, gosh, we would never be able to get this group together in my state. But I just want to mention that we started out very small, and then one by one, different state agencies started coming to the roundtable. And as a result, today, I think Lauren was mentioning to me, we actually have added a new member, and so we have 11 agencies that participate in this roundtable on a monthly basis, which is really stunning to me that people actually attend, and that we hear from these agencies and from the participants that it is one of the most valuable groups that they participate in their work. Well, the goal of the roundtable really is quite simple. We are trying to kind of break down the silo effect, improve communication and collaboration among the state agencies. As you know, in your state, there are several programs within state agencies that administer large amounts of money and provide services to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities toward getting employment. So we know that we have probably a greater than a 90% attendance rate on a monthly basis, and that while we have 10 or 11 agencies represented, agencies are now beginning to send 1 or 2 people to these monthly meetings. So we have our state Medicaid agency, we have our state DD agency, we have the Department of Labor, because they are so key, as you know, in administering the WIOA program. We have our Department of Health. In this state, maternal and child health operates out of our Department of Health, and because they do transition planning for youngsters who have special health care needs, they become a very important player here. Our Department of Children's Services is a participant, mental health and substance abuse, the Department of Treasury that administers the ABLE Act is a regular attender, the Department of Education, vocational rehabilitation, and then a newer member is General Services, who in our state administers a diversity program that helps minority-owned businesses get state contracts. And just this past year, in an initiative that the council led, we were able to get people with disabilities, their businesses, in other words, businesses owned by people with disabilities, we were able to get them added to that group. And so we heard today that there's going to be a press release tomorrow from the governor's office about that initiative. I think I mentioned that the DD Act partners, that means programs in all of our states that are created under the Developmental Disabilities Act, our university centers and our protection and advocacy system both participate on this group. On the next slide, you see a wonderful picture of this fine looking group. Look at that, look at all those smiles. We were just talking, Lauren and I were just saying, there's just an amazing amount of trust and camaraderie that has grown on this group. And so usually when people are gathering, we're checking in on people's families. Today we had a talk about where to get the best sushi. You know, we really talk and have learned a lot about each other and our lives at home and so forth. So it's just a really great group. But that said, we are very much goal-oriented in what we do when we get down to business. So I think I mentioned earlier that our goal, our core mission really was to increase communication among these state programs. So many of them not only doing similar programs with certainly the same goal, but also in a lot of cases serving the same people. And building personal relationships across the state agencies has really, really helped to make program administrators more likely to call each other when issues come up, or when maybe they have a customer in common. They're much more likely to reach out to each other. So I think I just said linking programs that serve the same people. So if people happen to be served by vocational rehabilitation, but they're also served by Department of Education, maybe they're connected in some way to the our DD agency, certainly our Medicaid agency. We have seen these programs meet outside of Roundtable, but we know that they met in Roundtable and established those relationships. And they used that as a jumping off place and created, more on the ground working relationships as a result of their Roundtable participation. And we do know that we are increasing disability employment outcomes across Tennessee, and we'll mention more about that in a moment. So now Lauren is going to tell you a little bit about what happens when we get together.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Pearcy. I'm the Public Policy Director with the Council on Developmental Disabilities. And so while this is a group that predates me, I've been here for about a year. I attended this group as part of my position at the Medicaid agency before I came to the council. And so I was very familiar with the group. I saw the value of it. And now that I'm on staff at the council, I help prepare the meeting, get the agenda together, get speakers lined up if we have them, and then also send out summary notes afterward. So I'm going to kind of take you through the details of those things, starting with the typical agenda. So we block 2 hours. It's usually 8:30 to 10:30 in the morning. We do provide coffee and granola bars, and that may be the reason we have 90% attendance. And Wanda, our executive director, gives a welcome every time. She sits at the head of the table, so you can kind of picture how this flows. And then we do a round robin of introductions. This is different than our round robin updates, but really just because there's always at least one new face. As Wanda mentioned, we have our set state agencies who are members, and we don't have any sort of application process. It's just whoever wants to come join as long as they're a state agency. And they then not only may send someone as a substitute if the regular attender isn't able to come to that meeting, they often bring colleagues either from different programs or on their same team. And so we usually have at least one new face, and that really helps us expand our network, but also make sure that we aren't speaking in jargon and we're really explaining things. And I think that actually helps the entire discussion make sure that we're not speaking at a level that goes above everyone's head. So it's a really nice dynamic. It's a balance between a core group of people who know each other really well, and there's usually outsiders, so to speak, new people, I should say. So often, not always, we have a speaker or a deep dive topic to anchor the agenda. So recent examples are, we spent last month, February's meeting, talking about employment data collection across agencies who provide employment services. And our goal is to come up with one collective metric for Tennessee, which, as any of you who work in state government may know, every state agency, whether we're talking about vocational rehabilitation or a waiver program, they may be providing similar services, but their metrics are totally different. And so it's hard to come up with one single, what's our employment goal, our employment rate goal for the state? And who are we talking about? Are we talking about all disability? Are we talking about ID and DD? So we started having that conversation, really led by our university center here is Vanderbilt. And they have just a brilliant data team who can be an external, kind of neutral facilitator of that kind of conversation and help move it forward. That's one example. Another example is we, the council, had a separate meeting with the governor's children's cabinet about a pilot they were doing for child welfare services. And they termed it single team, single plan, meaning they actually got to what we consider the holy grail, which is one document for a family who's maybe touching multiple state agencies. This is specifically for babies who are born with neonatal abstinence syndrome. So not a disability program, but we saw so many parallels with the types of things we focus on for coordination in the disability community that we asked that executive director to come explain the pilot, explain how that was accomplished through our roundtable. And then we had a discussion about what we could learn from that in the disability employment space. We have, the council has been leading supported decision-making work for the last couple of years. And so big topics like that and just employment in general are often discussed with a national speaker that we can bring in. We've worked, because Department of Labor is on this group, on how to help American job centers in local communities serve more people with disabilities. And actually probably going to do, we've done some visits. So we take the whole roundtable on a field trip and go see what an American job center looks like. And we're probably going to do some in-person training about how to work with people with disabilities. So those are the kind of tangible things that we work on together, in addition to just talking amongst each other about what all of us are doing separately. And Wanda also mentioned this last bullet on the slide, which is that new program within our state central procurement office for business owners with disabilities. We were able to reach a lot of state agencies, and then through them, their networks, just to get that program on the radar. So after the speaker or the deep dive topic, or in lieu of, we do a dedicated at least a half an hour, usually an hour, if not the full 2 hours, on just a round robin information sharing session. That's what the bulk of this morning's meeting was. And this easily takes up 2 hours. And people always have 2 or 3 items that their agency are doing. And sometimes they kind of approach it like, I don't know if this is relevant to the group, but here's something. And without fail, there is a connection made across the table and a linkage, because that program or that initiative or that conference, whatever the update is, was relevant to someone at the table. And a light bulb goes off and a business card is passed along and a follow-up meeting is set. So that is really exciting. It's a way to not only just kind of be aware of what each other are doing and foster those relationships, but really we watch the tangible light bulbs go off. So one example from today is that our Department of Health, Maternal and Child Health Services, convenes a youth council and for youth with special health care needs, and has been struggling with attendance. And so over the meetings, she's been giving these updates. Well, we had this meeting, we only had 2 attendees. Our next one is planned at this date. And because of side conversations and just relationships built, she realized that the Department of Children's Services and the Department of Mental Health also convene similar youth councils with similar challenges. So now those groups are all meeting separately, and they're trying to figure out what they can learn from each other, how they can pool their resources, and be more efficient about making a really effective youth council for 3 different agencies, but working together on it. So that's just an example from today, and we have one from every single meeting. So that is really I think the heart of our agendas. And so here are some images of recent deep dives. On the top left, you can see the single team, single plan presentation. The Governor's Children Cabinet is the speaker. On the top right, Jonathan Martinez, who's a national expert in supported decision-making, is in the middle of our happy group. The bottom left is our visit to an American Job Center. And then the bottom right is one of our data gurus at our DD agency talking about the data that they collect on competitive integrated employment for people with intellectual disabilities served by Medicaid waivers. And you can see how excited he is about that data. And it's a nerdy but very fun group, because we all speak the same language and get excited about this kind of stuff. So rules we follow, we've been asked many times about a dial-in option, and we really insist on in-person attendance. One of the reasons is that we talk about sensitive topics, as Wanda alluded, and we We don't put those in the notes. We try to make a really safe space so that people share challenges and confide in each other. And we also think the in-person dynamic has just made everyone really close-knit. So it's been awkward at times to refuse the dial-in option, but we've been pretty firm on that. We have also been firm on state representatives only. There are community organizations that we work very closely with who hear a lot about the roundtable. We do publicize it, and we have a page on our website we'll show you in a few slides. Often write about things that we talk about in our newsletters, but we do insist that it's a state government group for the same reasons that we don't allow a dial-in option. It's a safe space to talk about what's going on between state agencies and how to coordinate, and a lot of times that means talking about what's not working and the challenges, or things that aren't to be made public yet. The exception that we've made is our DD Act partners. So our Vanderbilt University comes, and so does the Protection and Advocacy Agency. Because we don't have a dial-in option, our Memphis-based University Center does not come, but they would be welcome if they were in town. The notes from the meeting are reviewed by members before distribution. So when I take notes about their updates, it's usually just a few bullets, and I send those out to each person so that they can see what's going to be shared among that group. And we don't include any sort of sensitive information. So I use my judgment on that, but then I also give them a chance to look at the notes, and those notes are just distributed within the group. So I've talked about this along the way, but the reason is that this is such a close group, and I think a group that is so effective because of those types of rules. So we wanted to touch on those. And now we're going to talk about outcomes. So I'm going to turn it back over to Wanda.
Thanks, Lauren. And I'll invite you to just jump in as you think of interesting facts about the outcomes of the roundtable. You know, sometimes I'm always amazed when groups have asked us to talk about the roundtable, because in a way the concept is so simple, but if you're involved in you know, in state government programs, you're real familiar with the silo effect. It's really not the fault, I think, of any one agency, but sometimes just not having that opportunity or venue where you know, kind of free discussion can occur, where agencies don't feel like they're kind of under pressure to name all the wonderful things that they've done in the past month or past year. What really makes this work is just, you know, I guess the ability of the participants and commitment to just really speak honestly. I mean, I got to tell you, I have been, as you heard from Donald, with the council for, you know, over 20 years, been in state government for longer than that. I have never heard such honesty on the part of agencies talking about, you know, what is wrong or what's not working with both rehab programs or Medicaid waiver programs. And you know, these discussions generate some really good solutions or possible solutions. And then also, we were just remarking today as we met how bringing up one thing, an agency brings up one thing they're working on, and right there in the meeting, you can have 3 other agencies throw you know, possible solutions, or at least throw contributions on the table that help to improve another agency's outcomes when it comes to employment or helping a customer. And that never fails, I can tell you. But looking at the screen, you know, some of the outcomes that we listed for today's discussion is that we do have not just better, but more meaningful working agreements between agencies. First of all, the Roundtable has been a group that we used to come up with interagency, our state interagency agreement on youth employment. The council's in charge of reviewing that on a periodic basis. And so this group has become the group where we look at that interagency agreement. Well, just over the past year or two, there probably have been a half dozen interagency agreements to spring into place between the state Medicaid agency and Voc Rehab and the DD agency. So agencies are looking at how do we take what we do and get it on the ground, push it down to communities by talking a little more concretely about how our two agencies work together. And I think that's been a wonderful thing to see. Another thing is shared training events. You know, we see agencies inviting each other to do joint training, training on the, what's the pre-ed thing? Pre-employment training services from WIOA. You know, different topics that we're training on that agencies will get together with another agency and they'll do joint training, and also publications. We developed a list of resources for our American Job Centers that might be interested in a variety of disability resources across state government or private nonprofit agencies, and we have developed a resource list for them out of the roundtable. I think one of the more wonderful and interesting endeavors has been shared data. This has been such an interesting conversation because as we were talking today, you know, sometimes it's a scary thing to share your data. It's a scary thing to set a goal in terms of your data and make that public, knowing that you may not reach it. And you may fall under criticism, and you know, agencies want to kind of, you know, show their best foot forward. And so, but this group, and I think a lot of it is the trust factor, has become really committed to working together to, first of all, having each agency be more concrete in identifying goals. In terms of how many people are we going to try to have in integrated competitive employment settings, and what else do we need to know about those employment settings. So we're really having concrete discussions about that. Today, we had a discussion about, okay, if each of the agencies is willing to do this, how do we set a state goal, and how do we get data to measure that? So we love the fact that, you know, that we're trying to identify data that will help us measure successes and to help us identify barriers or where we might need help, and being able to articulate those things publicly. Another outcome, cross-agency public awareness projects and videos. So there have been examples. I think the most recent one on our, we call it the Go DBE project. It's that governor's project for using disability-owned businesses. We have a video that Lauren participated in, and another state agency and their intern participated in. So we do, you know, we've done a lot of cross-agency public awareness endeavors and videos, and it's wonderful because on the roundtable, you know, if somebody has something important they want to announce, then the rest of the group can pick up on it. We can put things on our website. We were talking today, I've forgotten the example of the ABLE Act. So the Treasurer's Office was saying, you know, we really are still trying to get out information to families and individuals about the ABLE Act. You know, could you guys help us? And we sat there and talked about, you know, that the council could have our information person write the public information officers at all the other state agencies, and making sure that they all have ABLE Act information on their website. So we help each other in that way. One of the really exciting things that gets promoted on Roundtable is the idea of internships. So, we're really recognizing the value of internships toward employment for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And in the past year, the council just almost by accident discovered that the governor's office recruits, 2 or 3 times a year for interns to work in the capital, in the state capital. So we looked at that and thought, well, what about a person with an intellectual disability? So we got busy and we called a couple of our post-secondary ed programs for people with intellectual disabilities that are in the Nashville area, believing that that would be an easy linkage there, and just immediately got a lot of interest from those programs. Then we went and met with the governor's staff who was recruiting for the program. They were very excited. Well, the bottom line is that a young guy that was just finishing up, well, actually he was in this post-secondary ed program here in Nashville. He was given the position as an intern in the governor's office. Well, I mean, I cannot tell you how big this whole thing went over. Our legislature ended up giving him an award. The governor just, had this all over his webpage. Lauren and I went over one day to visit the young man in his job site at the governor's office. And it was really quite amazing. What a great job he was doing. The different kinds of activities that he was learning to do, from computer to, other types of things there in the governor's office. So that, because it got so much publicity, we started having our Department of Economic and Community Development subsequently brought on 2 interns with intellectual disabilities. Our Department of Education and Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. So today at Roundtable, we kind of celebrated those successes and then tried to figure out how we could better organize that among the agencies that were there. Both Rehab said, we've just gotten a phone call from our state museum wanting an intern with an intellectual or developmental disability. So we committed as a roundtable to kind of work together and see if we could figure out how to kind of streamline that system so that we could do a better job of linking students with state agencies that were, had internships available. So that's been a great success. Then another item is just collaboration on policies and practices. I would be hard pressed to name every policy and practice that has been affected by this roundtable. When agencies are able to communicate and learn about practices that are barriers, they really start to work on how to get those things out of the way. Lauren mentioned earlier the supported decision-making initiative that we've had in the state, and that has been something that this roundtable embraced. The reason that, and you're probably all familiar with supported decision-making as an alternative to conservatorships and guardianships, which are done, at least in our state, at an alarming rate, particularly for kids who turn 18. So our state agencies were all, when we brought this topic up, Department of Children's Services, Department of Education, both Rehab, DIDD, everybody was really passionate about this initiative in Tennessee. So we just had legislation to pass in our General Assembly, yay, just this week. And so it'll be targeted to be signed by the governor in a few months. But today at the roundtable, we said, well, the work has just begun, because we've now got to go educate people about what this is. And for a family member or an individual with a disability, how do we make a choice about supported decision making? How do we kind of construct things so that we don't automatically go toward guardianship and conservatorship and have a person at such a young age lose all of their rights. So that has been one policy and practice that we're working hard on as a group. Okay, and I believe I probably would have been very helpful to maybe show the photographs here while I was talking about outcomes. But there in the upper left, you see the interns who worked at Department of Economic Community Development. The young man in the center holding the largest certificate I've ever seen in my life. This is Jason Rogers, who was the governor's intern. And that was a recognition he received from on the floor of our General Assembly. Then Lauren doing video, making this presentation about the diversity business enterprise. I think, let's see, I don't know what that is about. It was like partners in policy making almost. But anyway, also Able Tennessee, an Able Tennessee effort that we did from our treasurer's office. So these are all things that the Roundtable's been involved in, and just wanted to share that with you. So as we wind up here, we wanted to just direct you to our council's website, because we do have an article there and information about the Roundtable with some links that you could find helpful and interesting, I think. So that, I believe, concludes the presentation, and we would love to have some discussion or try to answer questions for you at this point. Donald?
So, I'm going to mark everybody as, make everyone's microphone available. Just because when I make your microphone available, you'll still default to muted. So if you want to participate, you'll have to unmute your microphone first. But I guess what I'll say, we've got a couple questions already in the queue. Sandy Jordan and Amanda Green both ask about attendance. Amanda Green says, you have 90% attendance. Besides the granola bars and coffee, do you think why do you think attendance is so high? The safe space, which makes this essentially a state-level support group, great information and resources, the fact you are not creating joint products so the group doesn't come with a burden of additional work. And Sandy asks, what do you think contributes to Employment Roundtable attendance success?
Well, you know, I'll start, and it makes me wish that, and maybe this is something we'll do. Hey, Janet Schaus, here's maybe something we'll do is do some interviews of the Roundtable members, because I've had several Roundtable members from large agencies say to me privately that they feel closer to this group of people than they do their teams back in their agencies. I'm not sure I want that made public, actually, but the fact is, I think it is a safe place, and I think that we're doing different work in different ways, different age groups sometimes, but we're all focused on the same thing. and it's very clear that we're interested in employment. I think that's what brings us all together. The other thing that I would respond to is that, I mean, even I am dazzled and amazed at the fact that we learn new information every single time we meet, even on a monthly basis. An agency will bring up something that nobody else has heard. And so for that reason, I think people come back to keep up and to learn things that, you know, that are going on from a sister agency that can help them in their work.
Yeah, I'll just add, because I was on the other side so recently, and I think for a lot of these positions, the folks who sit on the roundtable, they're in a position to oversee an employment program. And even though they're part of a big agency or a big team internally, they may be one of the only people focused on that particular mission. And so we all speak their language, and we all have a lens that they may not have within their own team. And so, like Wanda said, from my perspective as a person sitting on the round table when I was at the Medicaid agency, it helped me do my job to have these connections and to be able to problem solve and really, like, I think the question was asked, is it kind of a support group? And yes, it is, but it's also, it isn't just venting. It's really problem solving in a concrete way, and having a team working on the same thing that you are in a different way than your own team back at home, because every person at the roundtable brings a different resource to the table that doesn't exist within each state agency. So I hope that helps answer the question.
So Nor Bryan asks, are there any individuals with disabilities who are members of the roundtable? And if not, why not?
It's a very good question. There are no members at this point of the roundtable who are people with disabilities or people receiving services. The roundtable has been representatives from state programs and state agencies. So it's not, we don't have a goal of excluding anybody. Once we saw what was created here, and that was a safe space for to break down some of the communication barriers and silo effects, we just kind of took that and ran with it. I will say toward you know, how a customer might get involved in this discussion. About a year ago, the Department of Education had emailed me and said, we got a student in a rural part of the state that is at risk of becoming homeless, having some real difficulties, been referred to the State Department of Education. We have no idea what to do. Do you think the roundtable could help? So I thought, well, that's a wonderful idea. So we shot that information out and ended up discussing the student at the next meeting of the roundtable. And I was amazed that there were about 4 different programs that were thrown on the table that ultimately did help the student get more, you know, settled in his life and be able to finish school, from housing to mental health services to, I mean, you name it, services that I didn't even know was out there. So, you know, to wrap that up, we started having opportunity to talk about people that were falling through the cracks. So again, with an ultimate goal, overriding goal of trying to be a catalyst for these agencies talking, that is kind of I guess, the MO that we've stuck with.
And the only thing I'll add briefly is that you may be familiar as Pie States with Tennessee Works, which is the umbrella partnership that all of the employment work in Tennessee falls under, and the Employment Roundtable falls under that bigger umbrella. So part of the reason when we're confronted with, well, should employers be on this group? I mean, an employer is a very important part of an employment discussion. Should people with disabilities be part of this group? there are a lot of stakeholders missing, but that Tennessee Works partnership includes all of those stakeholders. And so our little slice of that work is the state agency representatives. And none of them happen to have disabilities at this point. But that's part of the reason that when we do ask ourselves those questions, that we feel comfortable that there is an outlet and regular meetings to include those voices.
Janet Schoss asks, would it be possible to encourage state legislators to have interns as well?
To have what?
Interns.
Yes, Janet, absolutely. You know, interestingly enough, I understand the state legislature has their own intern. You may be aware of this already. They have their own internship program. So my understanding was I thought the Kennedy Center, not to put you on the spot, but I know that Elise has had some conversations with them, and it may involve the Next Step students at Vanderbilt to participate in those internship programs. But I think that is a marvelous idea to point out because, you know, I don't know about others, but in our state, you know, one of the biggest barriers we face in terms of changing policy on employment or anything else is getting members of our General Assembly to understand or relate to people who have intellectual or developmental disabilities. Once they meet a person or maybe have someone in their family, you just see an immediate change in the level of understanding and comprehension of what we're all trying to do and what we're all trying to accomplish.
I've noted it, Janet.
Because we know if we don't, you'll be calling us. Janet's from Tennessee.
Well, I just wanted to say that everything that Elise knows doesn't necessarily transfer to my brain. So there may be things going on that I'm not aware of. But
Hey, that works right here. I'm telling you, our office is so small, but I really eaten a lot of crow over silos in state government when I realized our tiny office of 8 can have silos as well. Just not enough hours in the day.
thanks.
Nor Brian follows up. Are internships limited to people with intellectual disability? Can people with developmental disabilities be included as well?
Absolutely, yes. I think, in fact, I was just thinking as we looked at one of the slides, I'm thinking that one of the interns at the Economic and Community Development Department, one of them had a developmental disability, not intellectual, and the other one had an intellectual disability. So absolutely yes to that.
Those are all the questions that we had in the hopper. So if people want to unmute their microphone and pose a question or type one in the Q&A or the chat box, we are standing ready to answer.
I see Ruthie's joined. Tell her hello.
Hello, Wanda.
Hi, Ruthie.
We're so delighted to have you, and we're here. It's just been a really great presentation and very informative, and to see how much the roundtable has grown over the years is really exciting.
Well, thank you.
Well, I
was going to say we miss you here, but glad you're where you are. Go ahead.
I did have a question. To what extent do the various agency HR personnel interface with the roundtable?
Interesting. You know, the various state agency HR, not really sure about this, but I will share one thing. One of our goals that actually comes that the roundtable shares working on, but that originated with our Employment First strategic plan, is making Tennessee a model employer for people with disabilities. And we had initially gained some really good traction with our state government HR department, probably over a year ago. And then just, one thing and another, just ran into that kind of didn't get the results that we were hoping. But we spent time talking about that today in the roundtable and how we were going to make that happen. A big commitment. So, to the question, I'm not thinking of too many HR departments of state agencies, but I'll tell you this: when we when that goal showed up in our strategic plan, and our strategic plan for Employment First is presented to the governor every year, and he personally accepts. I remember the first year we did it, him saying he, giving his verbal commitment to it. But, at the end of the day, I have to say we have not done that job well. But we are, we're regrouping. Let me say that. We regrouped today in the roundtable. We're going to be all over that.
I will say it's helpful to have a standing group that meets regularly when we do want to pull in someone on a specific goal, like state as a model employer. It would be easy to pull in someone from DOHR rather than try to who are the right people at the table, when can we meet, and then the awkwardness of making sure that group gels and we explain why we're here and the right people are at the table. And so a couple of examples of people floating in and out. When we've talked about supported decision making, the APS, the Adult Protective Services Department within a bigger department, came to the table and wanted to talk about that topic. They're not a regular participant, but now they know the roundtable exists. They could come when the topic was of interest. And there are a few other examples like that where someone floats in and back out, and then with others they just stay. Like Able was just brought on when we passed our law, and they have never left. And same with General Services. We just passed a law, and they came to one meeting to talk about it, and they've kept coming. So that's kind of how it grows, but also sometimes it doesn't result in a regular participant. It just results in a way to bring that person in for a certain topic. And I think a DOHR, a Department of Human Resources connection could be the same way.
I was going to say it's because Wanda and Lauren are so charming that everybody shows up and the people come and then they stay.
I'm going to make a new slide with that.
The granola bars help too. Yeah. I will say this, I mean, to, as we're talking to states participating, these kind of gatherings are, I cannot tell you how worth it is to convene these discussions. It doesn't have to be the council. In fact, it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter how small you start. When you start with just a few participants, and participants, the most valuable part really, even over the presentations we have, is this round robin. When we go around and people, they kind of get the hang of it, and then you'll find the meetings as they move forward get richer and richer, and people are bringing really great information into the meetings. People are hungry for this kind of information and sharing. And so I just encourage, states to make it happen. I mean, it doesn't matter who you're with, but make it happen. And I do say at the risk of sounding exclusionary, I think the thing that is important about it being state agencies is I think that, and you all know this, but as you do bring in, outside groups, heck, I was nervous about our P&A. I say that because she and I are very tight, but people are reluctant to speak out and be honest. But once you build that trust, and also there's really no complaining that, we maybe complain about our state the data system, our Edison system. But, you know, it's all very positive. It's very, you know, productive. You know, how are we going to improve? How are we going to make this work? It is just one of the most remarkable things that I participate in, and I just encourage you in your states to make it happen. Lecture over.
Thank you so much, Wanda and Lauren. I'm excited.
That's our partner at our American Job Center. Thanks for being on, Sharon. Sharon.
Oh, hey, Sharon. Yeah, thank you.
Does anyone else have a question or a comment or anything they want to add?
This is Janet Schaus. I work at the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center. As Lauren and Wanda mentioned, I'm a part of the Tennessee Works Partnership, which is the broader umbrella that the Employment Roundtable works under and with. And I'm not a part of the Employment Roundtable. I'm one of those outsiders. But I will say, I think just the personal relationships, getting to know who's in what department and who does what is extremely valuable, because I know from my standpoint, when I have a question about something, I don't have to go to a website and try to figure out, okay, now who is the person I need to contact about this issue? I know people in those departments. I know who to call, and if that person's not the right person, they know who to send me to. And that in and of itself is very beneficial.
That's a huge part.
Because we do the same thing. I mean, you know, people, you guys know, I mean, in government, you're always struggling, you know, who do I call about this? I mean, we're more likely to call a roundtable colleague and say, here's the issue, you know, help us.
Who should we call?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, it makes public comment periods so much different, because you get a public comment that relates to disability and you want to contribute, but having a roundtable contact who can explain really what does this mean, what should we be paying attention to, and translate that legalese for us. That's just one example of a time we would pick up the phone and be able to really make a better impact on policy in our state because of those relationships.
Stephanie Potter adds, great job, ladies. Thanks for working.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Employment.
Hey, are all the callers from Tennessee? Not that I'm complaining, it was great.
Well, it seems like we are out of questions, so why don't we conclude here? This session will be available as a recording on the Yes Center webpage for the event, as well as the Yes Center YouTube channel. We will email the link to all participants once the video is available. And thank you to Wanda Willis and Lauren Pearcy for taking time to talk with us about the way that they tackle interagency problems in the state of Tennessee.
Thank you, Donald.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Wanda. Thank you, Lauren. Hopefully see you all soon.
Yes, we will, Ruthie. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Take care.